Here's something very non-traditional I do when planting a new tree. Most instructions will tell you to stomp on the ground real good. And so the part of the instructions that I do follow is I ensure, because the one time I screwed this up, I was real sad about it, ensure that the graft point is above the ground. So on this particular specimen, that's a pretty obvious spot. When they come from the nursery, there's usually some sort of paint still on it from grafting. On this tree, you can see the scarring the whole way around. Let's see if we can get that to focus. So that's one thing to be sure of. But most instructions for planting trees say create a mound, stamp it down really good, then water it in. I do quite the opposite for those 3 bits of instructions. I create a deep recessed trough. I do not stomp it down whatsoever. I add soil amendments to the bottom of the hole before adding the tree, which gives it a boost at the roots instead of at the surface. Makes it drill downward. As I'm putting the soil around the plant, I lift to ensure that that stays above ground so that the soil will slowly sift down between everything in the roots. But you can see here bubbles coming up, the soil falling in. This is a way to fill in the air pockets that they're worried about with stomping. And I find it to be much more efficient, even though it does need to be done over a longer period of time. So you can see here that the rate of water flow is about like that, about like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and move that up a bit. You can already see the soil sinking, right? That's filling in all those pockets in a much more natural way. Because if you stomp on it and there's a pocket like underneath something else, it does not really end up filling in the pocket, in my experience. This is also much more forgiving for if your roots are all curled up, which is, if you saw this plant when I transplanted it, you probably saw that there was the one root was a little bit curled back. That's not going to actually end up being much of a problem for this tree because of the way that I planted in. Whereas if I were stomping on it, I may have ended up snapping that curled root. The curled root will figure itself out over time. So, for the most part, after the first watering, I do this regularly, and then eventually, after this first watering, I can just walk away and let it soak in without my oversight. So this is a little plum tree. This is another nice thing about this is I can actually straighten the tree a bit because the ground's so soft. I'll need 2 hands to push some of the mud on the back side here, which is not an option when I'm holding the camera, but I'll end up holding this and then pushing some dirt in the mud. I mean, it makes me muddier, but it ends up giving me a second chance to ensure the tree is perfectly well upright. It's great. It's really good. I'll probably, maybe I can, yeah. There we go. See? And now the tree is perfectly well upright. I've adjusted after the fact. It's in fact quite a bit straighter than it was before I dug it out over there. So the point of moving it was that that's a cherry tree and that's a cherry tree. This is a Saskatoon. That's pretty much all the taller it's going to get. It was supposed to get about 10 feet, but I don't know if that was a mislabeling or if it was the fact that the deer browsed it when it was very young and ate it down to the ground. Not sure which problem it was, but they only get about that tall now. And, oh, we got a little bird friend joining us. Chirp, chirp. Chirp, 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 chirp. That's the neighbor's plot there. And all of the weeds. So, yes, please reduce all the weed seeds. Eat them up. So this is what we're looking at here. You're a cute little song sparrow. Yes, you are. And that's how I plant a bare root tree, and that's also how I transplant a tree should I end up having to after a mistake. And we'll keep an eye on this little friend as it grows up, now that it's perfectly evenly spaced between the two cherry trees. I'm much happier with how that's going to end up being. So hooray, and happy spring. Oh, also, it's going to get down pretty cold still. There's going to be a couple of nights where it's below freezing a little bit. And that's okay, because this tree hasn't broken dormancy yet. Much of the point is to do this before it breaks dormancy. It's very important. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes. You know, don't water it in real deep on a night where it's gonna freeze rock solid, though. That's probably gonna need to let it drain out more than I'm used to for doing this earlier. Bare root plants typically are shipped from areas in the country much further north, so they're still dormant at a time when other things in my garden are not. And that's how they end up being able to ship them at a later date when the ground isn't refreezing. So, because, like, for example, there's a bud right in the middle of the Saskatoon that's green and just about to open, which is kind of exciting. Those are called June berries, and they ripen up pretty early. Not as early as haskell's, but early. Alright. That's what we're looking at. That's what time of year it is. All the flowers time. Happy spring. It's May 31st, 2018. Bye.